My name is Emily, and I'm 34 years old. I've been married to Daniel for nearly 10 years. We built a life together, steady, predictable, safe. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Or maybe it was me who changed. This is the story of how I crossed a line I never thought I would. I used to think marriage was unbreakable, that once you said your vows and built a life together, love would always be enough. But over time, I realized that even the strongest bonds can weaken, not through any single moment, but through a slow accumulation of distance. Little cracks you don't notice until one day everything falls apart. It wasn't that I stopped loving Daniel. He was a good man, steady, reliable, always there. But maybe that was the problem. He was always there, yet somehow he felt further away than ever. Our conversations had turned into routines, our laughter into polite smiles. We shared a home, but not a life. It was like living with a ghost of the man I had married. At first, I ignored it. I told myself this was normal, that all marriages lose their spark eventually. But deep down, I knew something was missing. I just didn't know what, until Michael. Michael had been Daniel's best friend for years. He was the kind of guy who could make anyone feel at ease, always quick with a joke or a knowing smile. I had never looked at him as anything more than a friend. But then, something changed. Maybe it was the way he really listened when I spoke. Maybe it was the way he noticed things, how tired I looked, how I always hesitated before answering when Daniel asked if I was okay. Or maybe it was just the way he made me feel like I wasn't invisible. It started with small things. A glance that lasted too long, a touch that lingered, a conversation that felt too personal. I told myself it was harmless, but deep down I knew better. The night it really started, Daniel had stepped out to take a work call, leaving Michael and me alone in the kitchen. We were just cleaning up after dinner, nothing unusual. But then, he looked at me, really looked at me. "You seem different lately," he said, his voice softer than usual. I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." He didn't look convinced. "You used to laugh more." The words hit me harder than they should have. Because he was right. And because I realized how much I missed feeling like myself. I should have stepped away then. I should have laughed it off and walked out of the room. But I didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, someone saw me. At first I told myself it was nothing, a harmless connection, a bit of warmth in a life that had grown cold. But the truth was, something had shifted. Michael started stopping by more often, always under the excuse of seeing Daniel. But there were moments, quiet, stolen moments, that belonged only to us. A glance held too long. A brush of fingertips that could have been accidental, but wasn't. Words that danced on the edge of something neither of us was ready to admit. I found myself looking forward to those moments more than I should have. They made me feel lighter, younger, like the woman I used to be before life became an endless cycle of work, bills, and distant silences. One evening, after Daniel had gone upstairs to work in his office, Michael and I lingered in the kitchen. The dim light cast soft shadows over his face, and I noticed details I had never paid attention to before. The way his lips curved slightly, even when he wasn't smiling. The way his hands moved when he talked, as if words alone weren't enough. "You ever wonder what life would be like if things had been different?" he asked, his voice low. I swallowed. "Different how?" "If we had met first," he said, watching me carefully. I felt my heartbeat quicken. That was the moment I should have laughed, brushed it off, changed the subject. But I didn't, because part of me had wondered the same thing. "That's a dangerous thought," I whispered. Michael's eyes didn't leave mine. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean it's not true." The air between us felt charged, like the seconds before a summer storm. I should have stepped away. I should have drawn a line. But instead, I stayed. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The night it happened, it wasn't planned. There were no grand confessions, no declarations of love. Just two people standing at the edge of a line that had already blurred beyond recognition. It had rained that evening, and the house smelled of damp earth and cooling pavement. Daniel had gone to bed early, exhausted from another long day at work. I stayed downstairs, absently tracing my fingers around the rim of a wine glass, lost in thought. Then, there was a knock at the door. Michael stood there, his hair slightly damp from the misty drizzle outside. He hesitated for a second, as if debating whether he should be here at all, but I stepped aside, and he came in. We talked, about everything and nothing, about how life felt like it was slipping away too fast, about the loneliness we both carried but never spoke about. The words felt heavier that night, as if we both knew they were leading somewhere we couldn't turn back from. Then came the silence. A silence so thick, so charged, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from my cheek, his touch hesitant. I should have stopped him. I should have stepped away. But I didn't. There was no rush, no frantic desperation, just a slow, aching surrender to something we had been holding at bay for too long. His touch was warm, familiar, yet foreign, as if I had always known it, but never let myself feel it. Every moment unfolded with quiet inevitability, like the turning of a page in a story that had already been written. And when it was over, when reality seeped back in, I sat there in the quiet, my heart pounding, my breath unsteady. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and I didn't know how to feel about it. In the days that followed, the house felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the very walls knew what had happened. Daniel would kiss my forehead before leaving for work, just as he always had, but his touch felt distant now, not because he had changed, but because I had. Michael and I didn't speak about it. When we saw each other, there was an understanding in the way our eyes met, a knowing, an unspoken truth that neither of us could erase. But with every moment we spent apart, doubt crept in. The thrill of secrecy gave way to guilt, and guilt to fear. What had I done? At night, I lay beside Daniel, listening to his steady breathing, wondering if he could sense it, the shift, the betrayal hanging in the air like an unsaid confession. And then, there was Michael, existing in the shadows of my thoughts, a lingering presence I couldn't shake. I thought that crossing the line would bring me clarity, that I would know what I wanted. But instead, I was more lost than ever, because I had broken something I could never fix, and I didn't know who I was without the pieces.